Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for this workshop today on mental health and resiliency for first responders. My name is Kevin Riddell. I'll be leading this workshop and a handful of a couple others that are all based off of just kind of some tools, tips, and tricks, of course, to help you guys navigate through the challenging job that you guys will as first responders. So as a clinical psychologist, I deal with mental health, of course, every single day. The clients that come into my office, the challenges, the stresses that they deal with. And I'm hoping that some of the information that I'll be able to provide you guys here today through this workshop will give you some insights into how you can navigate your own mental health and maintain resiliency as you move forward. With that, I know it's a big topic that I won't be able to cover everything in, so I encourage you to reach out to the 1-800 number here if you do have any particular questions or if you do want to follow up with a counselor, or they can connect you with someone that's confidential. And it's 24/7 availability for you guys to reach out if there are any things that are going on, especially due to your shifts. I know it can be overly kind of complicated sometimes as well. Online, you can also check out some resources. So that's homewoodhealth.com. So you can call or reach out to them, go online, tons of resources in addition to just mental health and resiliency in other areas if you're interested in kind of checking those out. So the goal for this workshop is we're going to talk about kind of some of the different stresses that you may deal with as a first responder. And then, of course, building that into critical incidents, which is a normal part of the jobs that you deal with. And then thinking about mental health as well as resiliency. How do you stay ahead, or how do you kind of bounce back and recover from challenges that may present? So by the end of today, hopefully you'll kind of have an idea of kind of the critical incidents, the impacts, and the requirement really to put self-care as priority for yourself to move forward. Right. So we'll start off with just a big part to me of understanding kind of your job, where you're at, is to be able to balance the good and the bad, right? A lot of the challenges, of course, that's what presents in my office every single day. People don't come in to tell me how amazing life is. They tell me about the difficulties, what you're exposed to, the challenges, the loss, the grief, things that you end up dealing with or you witness that might not even be your traumas, but those through others' eyes as well, right? But we also want to balance that out with negatives. So just like in a relationship, if a couple comes in and tells me about all the bad things, it's very difficult to want to fight for that relationship if all you see is bad. In a job, it's the same thing. If all you see are the negative, it's very difficult for you to want to keep going back to that job. So you want to think about for yourself, what are some of the good things about your work in that role, right? Many of you might hold a full-time job in addition to kind of just volunteering as well. So just thinking for yourself, okay, well, what are some of the good things that I can get out of this? Is it contributing back to the environment, to other people, the smiles that you can get? If anybody's seen the movie Hacksaw Ridge, to me, a good movie that reflects an individual's, the trials, the tribulations, the struggles he went through in the military academy just to be a paramedic, but he didn't want to carry a firearm. And at the end of the movie, they were talking to the actual paramedic, the actual soldier, the medic, and asking him, what was it like for you, and kind of what happened over the kind of the duration of the training? He's like, all the struggles, everything that ever happened was all made worth it when he ended up helping one soldier out, and he ended up getting this big booming smile, right? And that smile was enough to kind of take away a lot of the negatives of the past. So what's positive in your work? What do you get out of it? What makes you keep going back to do this again and again and again? Because you need to be able to balance out the bad things that do present, which is a normal part of the job, of course. So just like yourselves, I doubt you're typically called out to positions where people are telling you how great things are. It's based off of challenge. It's based off of negative events, right? And that's what those critical incidents are. These are abnormal based events where you're called out in order to try to help with the people, help with the environments, help with the situations, and it can trigger some pretty powerful emotions. And those triggers are based off of your backstories, right? So who you are, what you've been brought up with, what you've been exposed to. So whether we've been numbed to it or if it's the first time that I've actually gone through these things. And all of this is going to contribute to our own mental health and how we deal with it, right? And our mindsets that we typically have, we don't want it to have a negative impact, but the stress is normal, right? The mindset that we go in is that we want to get ahead of it. We want to bounce back. We want to recover, which is good, but you cannot eliminate the stress response, because that stress response based off of the jobs that you have, it's going to be normal. So we've got to make sure that we navigate it properly, that we don't avoid it. We don't just distract from it. We don't run away from it and stick our head in the sand, but that we properly deal with it, because it is a normal reaction to those abnormal situations that you're exposed to, right? Part of the challenge with mental health in your field as again the mindset that kind of comes from first responders in general. And to me, this is where I kind of pick on that hero mindset, which is you guys want to make everything right. You want to fix it. You want to make things better. No different than me when I have clients that come into my office. I don't want them to come in and struggle and have challenges and difficulties that I can't assist with. Doesn't matter if it's addictions or mental health or disabilities or conflicts with friends or family or workplaces. The goal is always to assist and try to promote moving forward, right? In your position, this is where it's situations that you're not going to have control of, but the hope is to be able to address them and navigate through them to the best of your ability, right? So that hero mindset to go on and make things right is difficult when the nature of your work is uncontrollable situations that are going to be chaotic, that often are going to result in trauma for you or even for many others, or just kind of the normal, the civilians or anyone else. They're typically going to change consistently, right? So you're set up to go to situations where there isn't really a simple win in play, right? Now we can cognitively reframe what win looks like. So in the end, if we can reduce damage, minimize harm, things like this, that can be perceived as a win. But we can't be thinking the win is like we're going to prevent all the bad things from ever happening, because it's just not possible, right? So we got to really be cognizant of like when we're going in, like what is a winning situation, rather than I'm going to be the hero and fix everything. How can we minimize the hurt and the harm to the best of our ability, knowing what's in our control, what's not in our control, parts of the things we're going to pick on today because of your role itself, because that's where to me your mental health stands, right? So when you think of trauma itself, which is pretty common when you look at the world. So if you think of another workshop that I'll be getting into in this series is in PTSD, vicarious trauma, things like this, post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is a common experience. When you look at individuals who experience trauma in their work, there's a couple different professions where trauma is the highest. Military typically is number one, but then you have like firefighters, paramedic, police officers, kind of all around that kind of number two range for what you're exposed to. And these are events that are going to be unique to each and every single person. So what's traumatic to one person is not necessarily going to be traumatic to someone else. So I don't want you comparing and contrasting to others. To me, it's based on the impact and again, your narrative and your backstory, right? And this results in a lot of difficulty for you to move forward if we cannot properly address and process those traumas. And it may not even be your trauma. It could be somebody else's. So somebody else just lost a family member. Somebody else just lost a house. Somebody else just lost X, Y, or Z. They're dealing with grief. They're dealing with something that just occurred in your life. And by you being exposed to it, it could be a one-off, it could be a one-time event, or it could be a recurrent event where you're constantly exposed to the same thing again and again and again, which just kind of makes us feel miserable or numb to it to the point that that can even become traumatic, that I feel like I just don't feel anymore, right? So there's lots of different scenarios, and it may present right after the event, but it could also present weeks, months, a year later down the road, depending on different triggers and stimuli that come up. So when you think of these reactions, when you think of what's going on, and again, how it's unique to every single person, a way to kind of break it down, and you want to look at this on an individual level, which I'll get into a little bit in the next slide as well. But the critical incidents you can break down from simple disruptive events, so something that's more of an inconvenience or sort of something that's just unwanted, to something that's more catastrophic, right? And again, this is what's different each and every single person. People's reactions are also going to fluctuate. So a mild reaction, something that's pretty tame, to something that's like overwhelmingly debilitating, completely shuts me down to the point that I could be on disability for a significant amount of time, right? Now, some people who are hypersensitive as well to challenges, there could be a disruptive event that could result in an overwhelming reaction, but it's not going to be carbon copy for each and every single person. So one catastrophic event to one person might only have a mild reaction from one individual, but it could be an overwhelming event to somebody else. So I don't want you to look at anybody else and think, okay, well, they're not stressed, therefore I shouldn't be stressed, or they're not in a position where kind of they're grieving or they're sad or they're struggling, therefore I should be fine. And if I'm not, that's where that mindset of weakness comes in. There must be something wrong with me, when really you have a different backstory, you have a different narrative. And this is where, to me, everything what it comes down to is it's the potentially stressful or potentially traumatic event, because the backstory drives and dictates everything. So the one example I like to pick on is, if anybody here has seen the movie John Wick, but the general premise of the movie, the first one anyway, is the main character his dog is killed, and then he goes on a rampage. And it's not simply because it was the dog that was killed, it's because of the backstory of what the dog represents. It wasn't just a dog, right? So what the dog represents to him, again, the relationship with his wife, that is where it became a traumatic event. Now, for someone else, you might witness the loss of a dog, and if you're not a big pet person, you never had dogs, it might not resonate or sit with you. But if you are a big pet person, you love dogs, or you've ever had a dog gifted from an individual, and what that person represents to you when they're no longer in your life, it might just click like, I totally get what they're going through, right? So this is where it's always a potential, because it's the backstory that drives and dictates and helps us understand what's going on. So when I have clients that come into my office, the whole point is to understand what they're experiencing based on the event, what that triggers from the past, and how we can start to process that. The reactions, kind of like we just picked on before, but the same thing, mild to overwhelming, all based off of how that person tends to navigate through stresses. And the responses from stress, which is kind of in one of the other workshops as well, they're pretty broad, right? There's no shortage of ways that we can be impacted by stress, mentally, physically, emotionally. But there's factors that can contribute to a greater chance of us being impacted by that critical incident stress, right? So one, of course, the nature of the trauma, the demographics of how old I am, where I'm at, my age, date of birth, gender, like there's different variables, how I connect with the trauma itself, exposure to trauma in the past. Have I done this 100 times or is this the first time? I remember one paramedic that I worked with in the past. So she had called in a crisis position because she had her first shift. So on her first shift, there was a car accident fatality. So on the very first shift when she went live, she was exposed to a fatality. And she's like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, now that's the traumatic event. So she's like, did I pick the wrong career? Did I go to school for all these years for something that I can't even do because of what she was just exposed to? Whereas others, once they've done it many times, they almost start to kind of numb to it, or they find ways to navigate through it, right? The aftermath, is it minor? Is it severe? Again, is it a fatality or is it a minor cut or scrape? Your support network, your backstory with mental health. Do you already struggle with addictions? Do you struggle with anxiety? Do you struggle with depression, right? Or do you tend to have a pretty stable sense of health? Physically, same thing. Are you physically healthy? Do you work out? Do you take care of yourself? Or do we tend not to take care of ourselves? We have a lot of other issues physically. We see the doctor routinely. We got other problems with diabetes, high blood pressure. We have high cholesterol. Like those can also have a major impact simply because it's a full performance. Your coping skills, your extracurriculars, your friends, your family, the neurological, your simple brain chemistry, and the attributional style, which is essentially what do you attribute issues to? Do you personalize it, or can you recognize that some of these things are external factors, that what happened had nothing to do with you, and you can put that into perspective, into context? Or do you take it all on and carry the weight of the world on your shoulders because you're like, I should have done more, I should have done better, I should have been here earlier, I should have, which tends to debilitate these individuals and increase more stress as well, right? So when you think of the stress, either short or long-term stress, they tend to be similar, but they can adapt a little bit. And this is like I commented before, there's lots of different impacts that stress can have on us. These aren't universal. You're not necessarily going to experience all of them. You just want to be aware and cognizant for yourself of which ones of these can actually, like, what are your triggers? What is your stress response? The more aware you can become of it, the more you can kind of step in to do something about it in the long run. So physical, of course, you get the aches, the pains, the fatigue, the weakness. You can get kind of the heart palpitations. You can get kind of labored breathing, things like that. Emotional, it could just be numb. It could be anxiety. It could be kind of shutting down, anger, irritability, snapping at people, guilt, shame, doubt, right? Behavioral, I can give up. I can stop going out, withdrawal, isolate. I can become hypervigilant to things that are going on. So sounds and challenges that are going on. Sleep issues, which could be up or down. It could be substance use that could go up or down for individuals. Cognitive thinking, focus, concentration, that I can't engage in. Decision-making skills that are all going to be negatively impacted, right? Racing thoughts about events that just persist that I can't let go of. Spirituality, just questioning what's going on, like what is happening, doubting your own faith, doubting belief systems, right? That existential mindset. How could this be happening? Is there something bigger going on at play here, right? So all of these kind of short-term mindsets which of course can translate long-term as well. So if these are prolonged, you'll start to notice greater impacts physically because your body exacerbates those issues. Emotionally is where we're going to see more of the mental health challenges, depressions, anxiety-based disorders, PTSD, behavioral kind of even increased sleep disturbances, more isolation avoidance, kind of just body giving up and shutting down. I don't want to go out or associate. Mentally, again, just that same repetitious inability to focus, inability to engage or kind of concentrate on what's going on, but then often fear of what if it happens again. So a big part of that stress is a what if thinking pattern. What if, what if, what if, what if, what if, right? And then spiritual, almost that just I give up, right? I abandon it. I'm not engaged. I'm not involved in it any longer, simply because I feel like there's no one protecting me any longer because bad things I keep getting exposed to. So I just give up on that faith, and rather than finding a way to get re-involved or invested in it to kind of make it a little bit more of a safety factor rather than a negative factor in my life, right? So you'll see little shifts, but there's going to be similarities in it. Now, it's not going to be universal for everyone. Some people might have sleep disturbances. Some might sleep through the night, right? Some people might be unable to kind of think, focus, and concentrate. Others might be a little bit more hyper reactive to what's going on, to everything that's present, right? Like, so you want to look at yourself. What is your typical stress response? How do you typically navigate through the challenges that present in life? Does your stress make you get headaches, backaches? Does it tend to make you avoid, isolate, or withdraw? So do a little reflection. Think back about, okay, well, what does stress do to me? Because that's your red flag. That's what you want to be aware of. As soon as you notice that, we want to make sure that we step in and we do something about it so that we can bounce back and recover. Because mental health overall, it falls on a continuum and there is recovery. It doesn't mean that once we start moving to the right of this continuum, that's the end, right? It just means that we need to make sure that we're putting the appropriate tools and skills in place to move back towards the left. So you'll see four kind of areas here: the healthy, the reactive, the injured, and the ill, represented by the four different colors: the green, the yellow, the orange, and the red. So for yourself, you can either think about it in the wording or you can think about it in reference to the colors. But the green is the normal. It's the typical ups and downs that we go through in life. We all have difficulties. We all have challenges. It's not about eliminating bad things from life, but it's about realizing that we can navigate through it. So when something occurs, I know how I'm going to be able to bounce back and recover because I have my tools, my skills, my resiliency, my self-care, my friends, my family, whatever it is. These are the things I have in place. So we want to make sure if we're in the green that we maintain that balance and stability. The reactive state is when it starts to throw things out of kind of equilibrium, out of balance, right? So this, to me, once I move into the reactive, the simplest thing really I want you to focus on is to check in again with self-care. Are you still seeing your friends? Are you still going to the movies? Are you still going to the gym? Are you still X, Y, or Z? Like whatever it is that you do for yourself, are you still doing it? Because I find what a lot of people do in the reactive state is they give up on the things that are meaningful to them, which actually increases that gap, it increases your stress, it increases that negative emotional response. So by putting back into practice the areas of value, you can actually reduce that gap and bounce back into the green. So the yellow, to me, it's a little bit more your self-care. If it's more reactive, which is again, things present in life, if I'm reacting to it, focus on the self-care, still deal with whatever it is it's presenting, but hopefully will help navigate into the healthy. The injured and the ill, it's a little bit different. So once to me, you pass that middle point into the orange, into the red, typically is where I suggest additional resources. Reach out to, again, friends, family, doctors, social workers, things like this, psychologists, whoever it might be. That doesn't mean you're going to get labeled or diagnosed with some mental illness, but I want you to start to understand what's going on, because if we let this prolong, if we let it continue for an extended period of time, it can move into the ill, which is where I would typically consider diagnostics and mental illness to be a part of it, which can also be disability-based claims, inability to perform. It starts to impact my entire life, work, friend, family, social, personal, right? So in the ill, there could be talking to the doctors, could be pharmacological based treatment, could be psychotherapy, so psychologists, psychiatrists, your physicians, or others involved. The injured, you may still have those individuals. I might not necessarily focus on diagnostics the same way, but if we can understand where we're at, this is kind of what's going on, this is the context, normalize it, generate the insight as to what's troubling me, reinforce the self-care back into the reactive, and hopefully we can move back to the healthy, right? So it does fluctuate. One day I could be injured, the next day I might be back in the healthy, could jump up back into the reactive the day after. So it doesn't always progress down that path where it has to move in one direction, but you have to check in with yourself. You have to pay attention. Where do you fall? Do you fall in the healthy? Do you fall in the reactive? Do you fall in the injured? Do you fall in the ill? Because if you don't know where you are, then sometimes it's tough for you to be able to get back on track. And again, despite whatever the trauma the event is, I don't want you looking at, okay, well, they're more reactive because of this traumatic event, but I'm in the more injured or ill state. What's wrong with me? Am I weak or what am I doing wrong? Because it may have nothing to do with that. It could be your backstory. Your container is just full because of other challenges, other stresses going on in life. So you just might not have the same coping mechanisms or skills available to you than somebody else, right? So don't compare and contrast to anybody else. Just evaluate for yourself. Now, if you're looking at other people more from their mental health standpoint, the key is you have to know who they are. So if I know someone and I know what they do, they always go to spin class, they always get up in the morning, they tend to meditate regularly, like whatever it is, if these are the things that they do routinely and now they're not, then odds are they're pushing into the more reactive state or even further, depending on how debilitating it is. So that's where I would be able to have a conversation with them about talking about, you know what, where are you at, self-care, getting back on track, or even suggesting other resources. And I'll pick on that a little bit later in this workshop about talking with others with mental health-based concerns. Okay. So when we're having these challenges, what you really want to be aware of is that like, it's not just something I want you to shrug off. It's something that can have major impacts in your job. This is where when you look at safety sensitive work like your own, not being able to focus, listen, hear, respond to situations, the impact it has on that awareness, that insight into situations can have deleterious effects, of course, on performance, on safety, and not just for you, of course, for the group, for everybody else that you're interacting with, right? It can impact your focus so that you can't actually attune to the scenario that's going on. It can impact your decision-making skills so that you end up freezing so that you don't know, what should I do? How do I move forward in this scenario, right? Your mobility, so just your physical ability and kind of that alertness itself. So if I'm hypersensitive to things going on, I could be more reactive, but I could also be significantly more subdued, and then I'm almost kind of just zoned out because I just froze in that moment as well, right? So that normal awareness that we typically would have that kind of makes us prone to succeed is impeded. And that interference can be debilitating for you, but also to those that's around you, which is why you really want to take that mental health serious and not just shrug it off, not just look at, hey, you know what, it's a sign of weakness. I'm fine. There's no problems here. I just need to get better. Like, you want to make sure you're doing the best that you can to move forward. Okay. So a couple things that we'll pick on. We'll move into just stress management here, but critical incident stress management, key points, goals, principles for reducing. One, don't make things worse. Don't blow things out of proportion, right? So we want to normalize. We want to be aware of what's going on, put it in perspective. This is where critical thinking comes in. So instead of just making mountains out of molehills, assuming worst case scenarios, and you might in a strategizing front to prepare and set yourself up, but I don't want you to do this in the sense of you're constantly what if, which ends up increasing stress, which debilitates your mind and your body from being able to move forward. The goal is constantly resilience. How do we bounce back? How do we recover? How do we take care of ourselves? How do we maximize our battery life? How do we keep our fuel tank full, whatever it is? So we're not on fumes, we're not running on low power mode, but we are recovering constantly from, again, the ebbs and flows of life, right? And the key in this sometimes is twofold. One is recognizing your choices, and two, it's always recognizing recovery, which to me is resolution. It's always thinking about, what am I going to do to move forward? One of my favorite quotes, Marcus Aurelius, he says that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way, right? We always have a choice based on whatever impediment, whatever obstacle, whatever it is that stands out to me. My choice is, do I play victim, throw my hands up, give up, and kind of be like, there's nothing I can do about it? Or do I find a resolution? Do I always look for the next step, the next door, the next window, the next kind of variable, the next path that I can take to keep me moving forward, right? We just got to make sure we're still moving forward. And that's where recovery, resilience, resourcefulness, all of these things come into play. That to me is what stress management is about, right? When you're doing, if any of you have ever participated in critical incident stress management based kind of meetings after events present, you'll kind of know where this is coming from. But the goal is to help you to debrief, to understand. It's kind of like the debrief, just to understand what's going on. So if you're talking with an individual, it's about care for yourself, processing what's going on, not as a not talking with a clinician or a psychologist, not as an investigation of what did you right and wrong, but it's confidential, non-judgmental, just to give you kind of an opportunity to vent, to get things out, with someone to kind of listen and guide and assist you in that resolution process. Again, the goal is always resolution. One of the best questions that you can always ask yourself is, if you had someone else in that position, what type of feedback would you give them? So in your field, if you had someone else that just went through X, Y, or Z, what would you tell them? How would you encourage them to move forward? Because if we get stuck in a negative mindset, we tend to get stuck there for a long period of time because we get jaded with the complexity. We think nobody else can navigate through this. But the moment you put somebody else into it, we tend to realize solutions, opportunities, paths forward, how we can bounce back, recover, and deal with these things, right? So just take yourself out of it, put somebody else with it, and think about that process. How am I going to move forward, right? Because that to me is the crux of resilience. So when I look at resilience, a couple definitions up there, just based on the video. I'm going to try and give you a reference point with my hand. So hopefully you can kind of see my video here at the same time. But to me, I put resilience on a continuum when you think of stress and you think of your coping skills. So if I have zero stresses in life and zero coping skills in life, to me, life is balanced. This is a decent place to be. However, this place doesn't exist. There's always stress in life. So whether that's work stress, family stress, financial stress, whatever it is, you have stress in life and no coping skills, there's an imbalance. This imbalance is where we tend to burn out. The longer I stay, the worse it is. So we need coping skills. Our friends, our families, our interests, our hobbies, our exercise, whatever it is that you do for you, this is your coping skills. So when you add your coping skills to stress, it can create stability. This is a good place to be. This is where I want you, right? If not, here is where my coping skills exceed my stress. There's a positive imbalance. The positive imbalance, this is where we thrive in life. This is where we're top of the world, right? This and this are realistic. Down here with neither of each, to me, is not, because there's always the stress. When you maximize coping skills, though, sometimes your stress still exceeds your kind of your whatever your buffer is for those challenges, the coping skills. So you're still in negative imbalance. The negative imbalance, again, the size of that gap determines how quickly we tend to overwhelm or burn ourselves out. So a lot of people fall into a trap when your stress exceeds your coping skills, which is we look at our coping skills as ineffective. So we stop using them. We stop talking to our friends, our families, our interests, our hobbies. We give up the coping skills, which actually increases the gap and actually makes things more complicated. It makes things more stressful. So what we need is to maximize the coping skills. And that doesn't mean that my stress is gone, but you'll see I'd rather my gap be here than my gap be down here, right? So once I maximize my coping skills, friends, family, whatever it is that I do, now I can directly address the demands, the stresses in life, hopefully bring it back down here to here, right? And this to me is where resilience comes in. An individual who is resilient does not avoid challenges and stresses, but they know how to bounce back. They know how to recover. They know how to adapt to those obstacles when they present. So someone who is resilient, by maximizing resources, using their coping skills to get back on track, they have to get from here just to here, right? But if I give up all my coping skills to get back on track, I need to get from here all the way back down to here, which is not likely going to happen. If I flip that continuum around, if I have no coping skills and I add one stress, I'm already overwhelmed. There's already a gap. But if you maximize your coping skills and you add that one stress, barely even phases you because you still feel that you're on top of the world. You're still in a position of thriving. So this is where that balance comes in. You got to think bang for your buck. What do you get the most out of? So when you can identify the biggest source of resilience for you, friends, family tend to be really big sources of resilience. Exercise, another major source of resilience. And I'll get into those again just in a moment. But we need to make sure that we prioritize those into our life. Otherwise, it tends to result in, again, the gap growing as we give up on the good things for ourselves. Okay? So when you think of resilience, self-care is often used synonymously with this, right? And a couple of those areas, one, it's the support networks, like I said, just having people in your life that you can vent to, that you can talk to. It doesn't mean you have to have a psychologist or anything like that, but just people in your life that you can talk things out with. Now, those conversations that you have and sharing, especially if it's the same coworkers, because it allows them, the like-minded individuals, the same stressful events, just getting it out allows you to kind of vent it and get it away from the head. It's like one of the old exercises in counseling where you kind of write a letter to somebody for grief and kind of recovery, but you don't send it to the person, but just by writing and getting it onto paper, gets the thoughts onto paper. It helps us to kind of let some of these things go and create some closure, right? So journaling, which is kind of a separate exercise, but that's kind of a journaling exercise. If you don't have those friends and family, but I don't want it to become the only thing that you ever talk about. So if it's the same event that tends to persist again and again and again, we need to make sure that we do have other things to talk about, right? So support networks, use them, take advantage of them. Typically, people are there for you. And if they're not, create that network of people because they are a huge resource in your mental health. Second here is being aware of your mental health. Do you know where you are on that continuum? Are you healthy? Are you ill? Are you injured? Are you just more reactive? Like if you don't know where you are, it's difficult again to prioritize which skills to recover, which skills to bounce back and to stay on track, right? So pay attention, check in with yourself. So almost kind of like your phone's battery life throughout the course of the day, you might look at your phone and be like, oh, I'm at 30%. My battery life is dropping. I need to plug it in. You want to do the same with your mental health. So if you realize, hey, I'm moving down that continuum, I need to take more care of myself. That's what's necessary. Your job and my job alike, like to me, your self-care is so significant because if you're not in the right state of mind, like I picked on before, mental, physical, emotional, kind of cognitive, spiritual, like all the negative consequences that can come in. If I have someone that comes into my office when I have not taken care of myself, I am not in a good place because my gap exceeds essentially my resources right now. And I'm getting triggered and I'm crying or I'm snapping or I'm irritable at them. Like I'm no good to them. I can't think, I can't focus, I can't concentrate. It does not make things better for the people. In fact, they're more likely to suffer because of what I'm doing because I'm not providing a good resource rather than being on par, being able to do what I need to do by taking care of myself and then helping the clients out that come into my office, right? Don't judge, don't blame, right? So this is, again, normalize. Ask the friend question. Would you blame someone else? The coulda, woulda, shouldas that you throw through your own mind, would you tell it to someone else? And typically the answer is no. I would never tell that to someone else. So you got to get out of your own head. Don't beat yourself up over things that happen. Recognize that what you're doing with your resourcefulness, with your knowledge, with your insight. You're doing the best that you can in a situation that is ultimately abnormal and often unwinnable, right? So we have to be able to recognize we are doing what we can with what we have available to us in those moments. And of course, hindsight is always 2020. When you look back on an incident and think, oh, if I just did this, if I just did that, if I just went left rather than right, if I just did X, Y, or Z instead, right? If I just hung out for a couple more minutes, right? Then I could have avoided all of these other disasters. But the point is, you only know that because that is after the fact. You look back and you're like, oh yeah, of course now it's obvious. To me, it's like the lotto numbers. So you look at the lotto and you end up seeing, oh, there's the winning 7 digits. After the fact, you think, hey, if I just picked those digits, I could have been a multimillionaire. But I now know the digits. I didn't know what they were before the lotto was drawn. And that's what happens a lot of the time. I find when people beat themselves up and blame or judge that they did something wrong, it's because they have new data after the fact that they then beat themselves up for because they're like, well, if I just knew that before, I would have been a millionaire, right? Or I could have saved so and so, or this could have happened, or that could have happened. But that's the hindsight, and that's where again it beats us up and it makes us doubt and criticize ourselves, question our beliefs, our decision making, everything that goes into it. Which again means I'm not firing, and I'm not going to be able to perform the next time I'm called out if that doubt is constantly there. So problem solving communication skills. So again, critical thinking in those scenarios, being prepared, thinking about how do I stay focused, how do I stay calm, how like and this is where talking with different skill sets, reflecting on your own experience, right? Other individuals, what would they do in these scenarios? Talking out different scenes with another individual based on different complexities, right? So it's just challenging that mindset. And this is where just reasoning skills, problem solving skills come into play. Because a lot of the time, people would just, you repeat things repeatedly, of course, because of the past and what's occurred. But if variables change, sometimes we got to be able to, again, use that adaptive, quick thinking in those moments, right? And the most successful people, what I notice in my experience, is those that are very capable of critical thinking in the moment and can adapt to whatever those incidents may be, right? Whereas if we always stick to the exact same plan, to me, that's where it can become a little bit more complicated because variables, again, all the situations are different. You might have kind of a textbook approach, but situations are not textbook. Like in my work in the DSM and the diagnostics and manual, like it's very rarely that someone meets the textbook definition of X, Y, and Z. We got to look at things in unique variables and assess it as such. And then finding ways, this says distract yourself, but to me, I'm not a big fan of the word distract itself. Sometimes you might distract away from things if it's consuming your mind, but to me, you got to make sure you have extra activities, hobbies, interests, things that you can do that are enjoyable, again, to create that positive buffer in your life. Do you like watching sports? Do you like playing sports? Do you like playing with your kids? Do you like going for hikes and bike rides? Do you like to watch a movie or play video games or board games? Like, what is it that you enjoy? Do you like woodwork? Do you like whatever it is? What are the things that you can do when you're not working so that you can stay engaged and stay happy and content and resilient through life? Now, sometimes if you're only doing these things as a venue to distract yourself, to me, you want to come up that chain again and come back to have a support network that you can talk to and vent and get these things out. Because otherwise, it's called the volcanic eruption theory of emotions. You just bottle everything up, distract yourself from it all. Eventually, it's going to find a position where it's going to just blow. It's going to pop, right? So again, whether that's journaling on your own, talking with others, sharing your thoughts and feelings, but be aware of your mental health. Don't let yourself keep moving down towards the red to the point that you're getting ready to blow. All right. So some of the simple things that most people are aware of and the healthy choices for life, of course, is one, eat well, right? So one of the things I suggest people check out is the movie Super Size Me. So if anybody's seen Super Size Me, the gist of it is an individual who eats McDonald's every meal for 30 days, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I believe it's within a week, his doctor essentially tells him, if you keep doing this, you will die, right? So you need to stop. So be aware of your healthy eating patterns. If you're not fully aware of kind of what that means, check out the Canada Food Guide, which has just been redeveloped, which to me is fantastic. It talks not so much about kind of what to eat, but the wheres and the hows of eating as well, because there's a ton of behavioral stuff that goes into eating, number of people, different venues, things like this that can contribute. To me, the simplest thing with eating is that we eat typically what's within arm's reach. So if you can reach it, we stick it in our mouth. Like outgrowing that toddler phase, putting everything in our mouth, only shifts in as adults. And that for most adults, we still stick all food in our mouth, but we just break down what is food, what is not food. But as long as it's within arm's reach and food, we still tend to shove it in our mouth. Okay. Sleep. How much sleep do you need? So the average is 7 or 8 hours, but an average is not a universal. You need to listen to your body. So your body might say you need 6 hours. And if you get up 6 hours Monday through Sunday, feel good, rested, energetic, tackle the day, great, hit 6 hours. But if you get 8 and you're still tired, then maybe you need 9, maybe you need 10. It's a continuum. It's a continuum of averages, just like anything else. Some people might need 5 hours. Some people might need 10 hours. Pay attention to your body, not some average research study that says this is what you must get. Now, with that, sleep to me is the most important variable for self-care. Because if I do not sleep, my emotion regulation, I'm snappy, irritable, angry, can't think, can't focus, can't concentrate cognitively. My energy is down, so I'm less likely to exercise. My nutrition is poor. I just crave carbs and sugars, right? Like if I don't sleep well, everything else tends to fall apart. So if you can prioritize anything, prioritize sleep. Shift work can make that complicated. So when you do shift work or you're on call, you got to maximize and take kind of every opportunity that you have. I remember a research study in the past that was based on the military where what they did was they deprived a bunch of military soldiers of sleep for days and days on end. Now, they ran them through a bunch of tests before, and then at the end of the deprivation, they ended up running through a bunch of tests again. So this was, you can see, after, and typically it was after 16 to 18 hours of not sleeping, that people's performance would start to decline, right? So for days of sleep deprivation, that decline was even greater, of course. So what they're trying to figure out is how much sleep is necessary before we kind of notice an increase in performance. Now, not back to peak performance, but at least an increase. Now, the military's key mindset and why they do a lot of this research is they're trying to create the super soldier. How do we create soldiers, or how do we get people to perform with less sleep? But the research constantly comes back and says the same. You can't. You need to sleep. And if you don't sleep, it starts to impede performance. On the good note, what they found was that as simple as 5 minutes, just 5 minutes of sleep. So if you're deprived of sleep, just having a 5-minute nap can start to increase performance, not back to peak, but at least increase your performance. So if you're tired and you have an opportunity to take a 5-minute nap, can still make you more mentally alert than you were before. And better is still better, right? So, I mean, if I got 50% on a test, 55% is still better than 50. And that's kind of what I'm picking on. You're not going from 50% on that test, end up sleeping for 5 minutes, and then you got 80% on that test because you slept for 5 minutes, right? But we're looking at an improvement, and there is a statistically significant improvement as simple as 5 minutes of a power nap that you can get. Exercise. So exercise, again, most people are aware of the benefits of it, but exercise doesn't mean you have to go to the gym and pump weights. It just means move. Another good video, if you're interested, to me is called 23 and a half hours. And basically the gist of this video is for 23 and a half hours in a day, do whatever you like, but for 30 minutes, can you just move? Can you get your heart rate up? Can you go for a walk? Go to the gym, chase your kids, do some yard work, just get yourself moving for 30 minutes a day, right? As a simple minimum standard. So exercise to me doesn't mean you have to do hardcore, high intensity based interval trainings. It just means get yourself moving for 30 minutes throughout the course of the day. Right? Limit caffeine and alcohol intake. So there's another workshop I'll be talking about kind of substance use. And the limit is making sure that it's still within a healthy realm, but it's not negatively impacting your life. A lot of people, unfortunately, because of trauma, tend to turn to substance use in order to cope with those areas, to numb the mind or to relax or take the edge off or to fall asleep or more likely pass out, right? So you want to be aware of that use of substances, like what are your patterns, what are the behaviors within it, and trying to limit it so that it might only be something where it is either within healthy limits, so you can check out the Canada healthy limits for caffeine and alcohol, or it's something that kind of is not having a negative impact in your life, because even within healthy limits can still have a negative impact in your life. And then, of course, positive activity. What is it that makes you tick? Playing with your kids, going to the movies, enjoying a nice meal out, cooking, right? For some people, it could be any number of different things, just meditation. Just what is it that you can engage in that is permission for you to take care of yourself? Now, the key in self-care is this should not be a chore. If some of these areas are not for you, I'm not saying you must do each and every single one of them. I want you to think which ones click for you. If you love exercise, then great, make that the priority. But if you are not someone that loves to really focus on healthy vegetables, eating balanced diet, then that's not the one I'm going to get you to emphasize, right? Think bang for your buck. What are you going to get the most out of, right? Others. So when we're supporting others, same thing, coming back to that continuum of mental health. We got the green, we got the yellow, we got the orange, we got the red. You want to recognize, again, you cannot identify someone else struggling if you didn't know who they were before. So if someone else was typically kind of always the individual that never really came out after work, never really wanted to go for the drink, never really wanted to socialize, if that was just who they always were as an introvert, more so than kind of feeling like, hey, the rest of us are extroverts or we always go out, to me, that doesn't mean that something is wrong, right? So you need to know the individual. If you don't know the individual, then it's tough to place them on that continuum, because what I look for is change. If I don't know something's changed, then I don't know if something's off. If you have recognized change, A couple of steps that you can kind of put into practice. The first one is simple check-in, right? So just acknowledge typically something that is behaviorally specific. So I noticed that you've been more quiet. Again, if that's not their norm. I've noticed that you haven't come out with us for the last few weeks. I've noticed that you've been more avoidant, you've been more withdrawn, you've been more tearful, that you have puffy eyes. Like whatever it is you want to check in and acknowledge, you're going to see something behaviorally, and that's what you're going to comment on. I don't want you to pick on kind of jumping to conclusions or assumptions. Try to pick on the behaviorally specific because it's a lot more difficult for somebody to contest or to challenge that when it's something that you can actually physically witness. Okay. So once you can bring that up, you can validate. So if they do bring things up, you would validate where it is, whatever it is that they're going through, right? So I can understand where you're coming from. I know this can be difficult. So just normalize what those events or experiences could be, and not to put yourself in their shoes necessarily and to say, I know exactly what you're going through, but just to validate their front. But you also need to look for feedback from them about what are they looking for? Are they looking for support? Are they looking for guidance? Are they looking for help? Are they looking for normalization? So in their kind of communication with you, that's what you're going to be paying attention to. But you want to validate based on what it is that they bring up, and then communicate with them, A, resources, and B, is there anything I can do? So I can see X, Y, or Z is what's kind of going on. This can be normal based on certain situations. If they bring up what their challenges or troubles are, is there anything I can do to help you? And if not, I know of some resources, your EFAP or other individuals that you could reach out to if you're interested in, right? So you're providing that support and guidance. But what I don't want you to do is to tell them how to get better, how to fix it, what to do, if that's not what they're looking for, because that can actually create a distance and a gap between you and those other individuals, because they might not be looking for anything for you to fix. They might just be looking for, and for many people, again, just jumping back to that role, many of you might have that fix it mindset where you're like, if there's a problem, we've got to make it right, right? And another video, if you have a chance to look up, it's called It's Not About the Nail, which essentially it's a listen versus do video. Sometimes people just need to vent, someone to listen to them. They don't always need someone to do, to fix, and to make everything better for them, right? So just being aware when they bring things up, and you can ask, what is it that I can do to support you? Like, you just need me to listen, or is there anything I can actually do tangibly to help you in this position, right? When do I want you to seek help? And this is where either on a personal level, or if you notice something for someone else, the key word to me is always the same: change. When you notice there's a persistent change that essentially impacts that individual negatively, right? So if there's a positive change, like this person never worked out before and now they're going to the gym every week, that's not necessarily a bad thing unless you can see that it's starting to impact their sleep, they're more cranky, like if there's other things going on. But you can still talk to them about the positive. Like, hey, I've noticed that you've been going to the gym every week. That's awesome. We'll cut you into it, right? And if they bring up a stress, then you can kind of generate that conversation and move forward. But otherwise, if it's the negative changes, they're not they're more disheveled. They're not doing their hair anymore, right? You see big bags under their eyes. They're kind of falling asleep in car, whatever it is, right? You're looking for change, things that are not the same. So if you notice those changes, and typically those changes are persisting for a couple weeks, then that's what you want to be aware of. But you also, if you know these people, you can be aware of the bigger picture, right? So for the second one here, frequent complaints of tiredness. So if this is a persistent change, a frequent complaint of tiredness, this is where backstories and narratives come into play. So if I know that this person is complaining of tiredness, but they just had a brand new child born, so they now have an infant at home that we know is likely going to disturb their sleep, as it does for almost everyone, I don't think it's a mental health based issue. There's a natural progression here, but it still reinforces, okay, well, how do we take care of ourselves? How do we get that sleep on a personal level? Because when you're working in a position that's safety sensitive, going in sleep deprived, even with a newborn at home, doesn't make it better. But we just want to know that we are doing the best that we can to move forward in these scenarios, in these different areas, right? So mental health, big area for individuals. Anxieties, traumas, right? We can have addiction-based issues. Be aware of where you fall in these areas, because these incidents, it's a normal part of your life. Most people don't have to deal with it, but it's not going to be the same for everyone. One person's trauma is not the same as anybody else's. So just recognize that stress response is normal. It is part of kind of that job that you deal with, but learning how to navigate through it is where you end up coming out on top. That's how you end up becoming more resilient, because you put yourself first. You take care of yourself. You do what you need to do rather than always wait for your battery to be drained and then think, I plug it in when I'm already fully depleted. Just keep it going. Think bang for your buck, right? Thanks for listening to me for this one. If you're checking out the other workshops, again, just a couple of the resources that are pretty consistent. One, just phone numbers and helplines that you can reach out to if necessary, including the wellnesstogether.ca, the website, and the phone number if you need to reach out to someone to talk with. And then, of course, as I brought up at the beginning, the 1-800 number through your EFAP program. So reach out to them if you do have your own personal concerns or challenges. The EFAP, it's also a family plan. So if you have spouses or kids that are having a difficult time navigating or dealing with some of the things that maybe you deal with or anything external, they also have access to it. But check out the websites. So I encourage you, as always, reach out when you need the help, right? I mean, that hero mindset, like I can do it by myself. Those that are the strongest are those that are surrounded by people that support us and prop us up, right? I have a chair with 4 solid legs because we got all those supports. It's way sturdier than that chair that's kind of toppling because there's only one leg left. Okay. So thanks for listening to me. If you check out the other workshops, I hope I can kind of provide more insight into some of those. So until next time, thanks for paying attention. Take care, everybody.